They all smiled in that picture. Big, bright, picture-perfect grins. You'd never guess, looking at it, that just minutes before, my daughter had locked herself in the bathroom and sobbed until her cheeks turned crimson. That day was supposed to be about capturing a memory. I didn't realize we were immortalizing a lie. I found the photo again last spring. It was tucked in a cardboard box, buried beneath years of holiday cards and forgotten school projects. The edges were curled, the colors slightly faded, but those smiles, still perfect, still fake. I held it in my hand and felt something inside me twist. Before I go on, if stories like this mean something to you, if you've ever felt like the truth was hidden behind a smile, consider subscribing to the channel. There are more stories waiting to be told, and maybe one of them will feel like yours. The box had been collecting dust in our attic for years. I had gone up there looking for something else, a camping lantern, I think, but instead I found the ghosts of our past. The photo was taken in front of our old house, the two-story colonial in suburban Connecticut, with its neatly trimmed hedges and white shutters, a house that from the outside looked like stability, order, maybe even love. But inside, silence screamed louder than any storm. That was the house where I raised my children, where we ate dinner at 6 p.m. sharp, no elbows on the table, where shoes were always lined up by the door, and "I'm fine" was the default answer, even when no one was. That house trained us in the art of appearances, and no one mastered it better than Ellie. Ellie was my youngest. She had my eyes, hazel with a flicker of green, but her father's stubborn jaw. She was quiet, thoughtful. She liked to sit on the windowsill with a book or draw with her headphones in, the kind of child teachers described as polite and well-behaved. But I knew there was something more behind those downcast eyes. Back then, I didn't have the words for what I sensed. Just a feeling, like something soft unraveling under the surface. Ellie never caused trouble. She never yelled. But she flinched when voices were raised, even if they weren't aimed at her. She avoided eye contact when her older brothers teased her, and she almost never spoke at the dinner table, even when asked a direct question. I used to chalk it up to adolescence. She's just shy. I'd tell myself, sensitive, she'll grow out of it. I repeated that line like a prayer, desperate to believe it. After all, we had rules, we had order. Our family wasn't broken, we were structured. At least, that's what I told myself. My husband, Jack, was the kind of man who believed in firmness. Not violence, no, but sharpness. He believed in discipline, control, composure. He never raised his hand, but his tone was enough. He didn't tolerate backtalk or moodiness. If the boys acted out, he grounded them. If Ellie withdrew, he dismissed it. "She's just being dramatic," he'd say with a wave of his hand. And I would nod, even when it didn't feel right. The truth is, I was afraid. Not of Jack, exactly, but of disrupting the image. Of poking holes in the facade we'd spent years constructing. I told myself I was protecting my children by keeping things peaceful, but really, I was protecting myself from the chaos of honesty. I remember one night, Ellie must have been 9, when I found her sitting on the bathroom floor, the lights off. She had her knees pulled to her chest, her back against the tub. She didn't say a word. I asked if she was okay, and she nodded, just nodded. I gave her a hug, told her I loved her, and left the room. I didn't press, I didn't ask again, and I never mentioned it to anyone. That memory came flooding back when I looked at the photo. The day it was taken, Ellie wore a pale blue dress with tiny embroidered daisies. She hated that dress, said it was itchy, but Jack insisted. "That's just for the picture," he told her. "Smile nice." And she did. She smiled like we all did, baring her teeth through the discomfort. And now, years later, that smile haunts me. That photo was supposed to be a keepsake, something we'd frame and look at fondly. But when I held it in my hands, all I could see was the lie. The way her shoulders were slightly hunched, the forced lift of her cheeks, the way her eyes didn't shine. That day, something in me began to shift. I realized I had missed something vital, something Ellie had been trying to show me all along. And that moment, standing in the attic with the photo shaking in my hand, was the beginning of everything. Our house had a silence to it. Not the peaceful kind you find on quiet mornings or snowed-in Sundays, but the kind that hummed with tension. It was the silence of words unspoken, of feelings pushed down so deep they almost disappeared. Almost. Each day followed a strict rhythm. Jack would wake at 6, brew his coffee and read the paper at the kitchen table. The boys would trail in, one after the other, half asleep but obedient, sliding into their chairs without complaint. Ellie always came last, always with her hair still damp from a rushed shower, her backpack already on her shoulders, as if she couldn't wait to be out the door. She never caused trouble. She did her chores, kept her grades high, never asked for much. But I noticed the small things, how she'd flinch at sudden noises, how her fork barely made it to her mouth at dinner, how she'd disappear into her room the moment her plate was empty. She had these sketchbooks, dozens of them, stuffed under her bed, behind her bookshelf in the back of her closet. I only found them later, much later, but back then I'd sometimes catch a glimpse of her drawings. They weren't the cheerful scenes I'd expect from a 12-year-old girl. No rainbows, no cartoon animals, just dark, swirling shapes, broken faces, shadows in corners. One afternoon I saw her sitting on the floor in her room, drawing with such intensity she didn't even notice me at the door. I asked what she was working on. She slammed the notebook shut and looked up with wide, startled eyes. "Nothing," she whispered. "Just doodles." I wanted to press, I should have, but instead I smiled and said, "Looks good, sweetie." Then I walked away. Sometimes I'd hear her at night, talking softly to herself, or maybe to no one. Other times, I'd pass by her room and hear silence so thick it made me pause. It wasn't peace, it was absence, a void. And the more I noticed it, the more I realized how alone Ellie seemed, even when we were all together. The boys were loud, boisterous, always joking with each other or roughhousing in the yard. Jack encouraged that kind of energy, saw it as strength, but when Ellie spoke softly, when she showed hesitation or fear, he saw it as weakness. "She's too soft," he'd say. "Needs to toughen up." Once during dinner she asked if she could skip soccer tryouts. "It's just not for me," she said quietly. Jack barely looked up from his plate. "You're doing it," he said. "We don't raise quitters in this house." She nodded, her lips pressed into a thin line. And the next day she went. She played. She came home with scraped knees and silent tears. I wanted to comfort her, but Jack's voice echoed in my head. "You coddle her too much." So I didn't. I just handed her an ice pack and told her she did great. And when she nodded without a word, I let it go. I think that's when the guilt started growing in me. Slowly, quietly, like ivy on brick. I'd see the way her shoulders curled inward when she walked past her brothers. How she'd hold her breath when Jack entered the room. How she never brought friends home, never asked to go out, never really laughed. There was one moment, though, one that stuck with me like a splinter. It was during a family gathering, Christmas at Jack's parents' house. The room was full of noise, uncles arguing about football, aunts sharing gossip, kids running wild. Ellie sat in the corner, knees tucked to her chest, eyes glued to the floor. Jack's sister tried to draw her into conversation. "What's your favorite subject at school?" she asked cheerfully. Ellie shrugged. "Do you like art?" Another shrug. Someone joked, "Don't worry, she'll come out of her shell eventually." Everyone laughed politely, except Ellie. She didn't even blink. I caught her eye across the room, and something in her gaze broke me. It was blank, not angry or sad, just empty, like she'd already accepted that no one was really listening. Later that night, I asked her if she was okay. We were alone in the car, the snow falling soft and quiet against the windshield. She looked out the window and said, "I'm fine." It wasn't the words. It was how she said them, like she'd practiced. Like "I'm fine" was a costume she'd been forced to wear. I remember my hands tightening on the steering wheel. I wanted to say, "You don't have to be." I wanted to say, "Talk to me." But I didn't. I drove home in silence. That house we lived in, it wasn't violent, it wasn't loud, but it was heavy. And in that heaviness, Ellie was sinking. As the months passed, Ellie began to drift even further into herself. It wasn't dramatic, no shouting matches, no slamming doors. It was subtle, like watching a photograph fade in slow motion. One day, she stopped coming downstairs for breakfast. Another, she started locking her bedroom door. Then she stopped answering when her brothers called her name. At first, Jack brushed it off. "She's being a teenager," he'd mutter. "It's a phase, leave her be." But I knew better. This wasn't rebellion or adolescence. This was something deeper, something wounded. One Saturday afternoon, I knocked on her door just to check in. "Hey, Ellie, want to come help me bake?" No answer. I knocked again. "Sweetheart?" Still nothing. When I gently turned the knob and found it locked, my heart sank. I stood there for a long moment, listening for any sound, any sign that she was okay. Eventually, I heard the soft click of music playing, low and distant, like it was meant to drown something out. That night, I brought it up to Jack. "She's locking herself in her room," I said carefully. "I think we should talk to her. Maybe she needs someone to talk to, a professional." He scoffed. "She's not crazy, Rachel. She just needs to snap out of it." "She's not crazy," I replied, a little sharper than I intended. "She's scared, or hurt, or something. I don't know, but—" Jack held up a hand. "Don't start. You're overthinking again. She's fine." But she wasn't. Ellie's drawings grew darker. I caught glimpses, just flashes when she didn't expect me. One sketch showed a girl with no mouth. Another, a house with black smoke pouring from every window. There was one that made me sit down and cry in the hallway, a family portrait with each figure labeled Dad, Mom, Brother, Brother. And then, in the corner, a small stick figure in grey, scribbled so faintly you could barely see it. Above it, she'd written, "Invisible." Around that time, I received a letter from the school. It was from the guidance counselor, Ms. Reeves. She wanted to schedule a meeting to discuss Ellie's emotional withdrawal and increasing isolation. The words stung, but they weren't a surprise. When I showed the letter to Jack, he barely glanced at it. "They're always trying to push therapy," he muttered. "She's just quiet. That's not a disorder." "It's not just quiet," I said. "She's disappearing." He looked at me, frustrated. "What do you want me to do? Force her to sit around and talk about her feelings? That's not how we solve things in this house." I didn't say it then, but I thought, maybe that's the problem. I went to the school alone. Ms. Reeves was kind, patient. She told me Ellie often sat alone at lunch, rarely raised her hand in class, and seemed emotionally unreachable. She described Ellie's artwork as profound but disturbing and recommended weekly sessions with the school psychologist. I agreed immediately. Ellie didn't resist when I told her. She just nodded and said, "Okay," in that same flat tone I was coming to recognize. I asked if she wanted to talk about anything. She shook her head. Not now. Still, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, finally, we were doing something right. But at home, nothing changed. Her brothers made their usual snide comments. "She's so weird. Why can't she be normal?" And Jack did nothing to stop them. He'd laugh or roll his eyes, sometimes even join in. Ellie would just disappear upstairs, her footsteps soft, as if trying not to exist. I started noticing how often she apologized. For everything. For bumping into a chair. For forgetting to take out the trash. For not smiling fast enough when someone said her name. "Sorry," she'd whisper, even when no one had blamed her for anything. One night, I caught her staring at herself in the bathroom mirror. Her expression was blank, almost unrecognizable. When she noticed me behind her, she jumped. "Sorry," she said quickly, stepping aside. "You don't have to be sorry," I told her. "Not for that. Not for anything." She nodded, but her eyes stayed on the floor. There were moments when I tried harder, when I'd sit on the edge of her bed and ask about her day, or offer to take her out for ice cream. Sometimes she came, sometimes she smiled briefly, but it never lasted. It was like trying to hold water in your hands. No matter how tight you squeeze, it always slips through. I began to wonder if I had waited too long, If by the time I realized she was drowning, she was already too deep to reach. And still, she never raised her voice, never cried in front of me, never said what was wrong. But I could feel it, growing louder in the quiet. Something inside her was breaking, and I was starting to understand that if I didn't act soon, we'd lose her entirely. It was a warm September afternoon when we took that photo, the one that would later haunt me like a whisper in the dark. Jack had insisted on it. "We need a new family picture," he'd said. It's been years. He was in one of his moods, the kind where everything had to be perfect, the house spotless, the kids coordinated, the smiles big and convincing. He picked out everyone's outfits the night before. Navy and cream, polished but casual. I remember Ellie standing in the hallway holding that pale blue dress like it weighed 100 pounds. "Do I have to wear this?" she asked, not whining, just quiet, resigned. Jack stepped in before I could answer. "Yes, you do. It's just a dress, Elle. Smile for the camera, and it'll be over before you know it." She said nothing, just walked back to her room with the dress pressed to her chest. I watched her go, that same tightness in my chest rising again. I should have said something, offered her another option, defended her discomfort, but I didn't. I told myself it wasn't the moment, that we'd talk later. That morning, she didn't come down for breakfast. I went to her door and knocked. No answer. When I opened it, I found her sitting on the edge of her bed, already dressed, her hands gripping the hem of that blue fabric so hard, her knuckles were white. "You look lovely," I said, my voice brittle. She didn't look up. We drove to the photo studio in near silence. Jack hummed along to the radio. The boys argued in the back seat. Ellie stared out the window the entire time. Her face turned just enough that I couldn't see her eyes. The photographer was a cheerful woman with a fake laugh and a clipboard. She adjusted our poses, angled our chins, reminded us to smile. Jack was all charm, praising the boys for standing tall, gently nudging Ellie to lift her chin. At one point, she winced when he touched her shoulder. "Come on," he said through gritted teeth, still smiling. "Just one more, let's make this a good one." Ellie's smile was thin. Her lips moved, but her eyes didn't. The shutter clicked. It was over. We left the studio with our perfectly framed lies tucked into a paper envelope. Jack seemed pleased. "That wasn't so bad, was it?" Ellie didn't respond. When we got home, she disappeared upstairs. Hours passed. Dinner came and went. No Ellie. I climbed the stairs and knocked, then knocked again. No sound. Panic bloomed in my chest. I called her phone. No answer. I called her friends. None of them had heard from her. Jack tried to downplay it. "She's probably just sulking somewhere, give her space." But something in me snapped. "She's not sulking, Jack. She's gone." We drove around for hours. Checked the park, the school playground, the library. I called and called, each ring hammering deeper into my fear. What if she'd run away? What if she'd... And then, just as the sun began to dip, I saw her. She was sitting on a bench by the lake near our neighborhood, her legs tucked up, arms around her knees. The water reflected the golden sky, and Ellie looked small against all that stillness. I approached slowly, afraid that if I moved too fast, she might vanish. When she saw me, she didn't flinch. She just looked up and said, "I needed to breathe." I sat beside her. "You scared me." "I didn't mean to." "I know." She was quiet for a long time. Then she whispered, "I hate how we smile for pictures. Like that makes things okay." My heart cracked. "You don't have to pretend, Ellie." "Not with me." She didn't answer right away. Then, just before she stood to go, she said, "One day you'll hear me. I promise." That line stayed with me, echoed in my dreams, in the silence of our dinner table, in the space between us. Back at home, she went straight to her room. Jack asked where she'd been, and I told him, "Out. She's fine." He didn't press, but she wasn't fine, and neither was I. That photo, with all its smiling faces and perfectly pressed clothes, became a symbol, not of unity, but of everything we refused to see. Every time I looked at it, I saw Ellie's eyes, flat, distant, pleading, I didn't know it yet, but that was the moment everything began to shift. That single photo meant to freeze joy in time had instead captured the fracture, and it was growing. After the photo, something shifted in me, quietly but unmistakably. I began watching Ellie more closely, not with worry or frustration, but with attention, intent. I paid attention to the way she never spoke unless spoken to, the way she moved through the house like a shadow, how she always seemed braced for something, like she was preparing for an invisible blow. Jack, meanwhile, returned to routine. "She's just moody," he said when I brought it up. "All girls get like this, don't make a mountain out of it." But the mountain was already there. He just refused to see it. Then one morning, I found a note on the kitchen counter. It wasn't addressed to anyone, and it was barely more than a scrap of lined paper, folded twice. Inside, in Ellie's unmistakable handwriting, it said, "Sometimes it feels like I'm disappearing, and no one would notice if I did." I sat down, the air pulled from my lungs. I waited until Jack left for work, then walked upstairs and knocked on her door. "Can we talk?" I asked. A pause, then, "Okay." She sat on her bed, knees pulled up, her arms wrapped around them. I held out the note. "I found this." She looked at it. Then she looked at me. "I didn't think you'd see it. Why did you leave it?" Her voice was small. "Because I couldn't say it out loud." I sat beside her, careful not to touch. "I see you, Ellie. I see that you're hurting, and I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner." Tears welled in her eyes, but she blinked them away. "I don't know how to talk about it," she said. "It's like, if I start, I won't be able to stop. You don't have to say everything," I told her. "Just say something." She hesitated. Then, "I feel scared all the time." I didn't push for more. That single sentence was enough to open the door. Later that day, I called Ms. Reeves and asked for a referral to a therapist outside the school, one who could see Ellie regularly, privately. Someone with space for silence, for softness. When I brought it up with Jack, his reaction was immediate and cutting. "A therapist? You're overreacting. She's telling us she's afraid, Jack. She's manipulating you. She's got you wrapped around her little finger. She left a note saying she feels invisible." He waved a hand. "She's being dramatic." "No," I said, my voice firm for the first time in a long while. "She's being honest, and we're finally listening." He looked at me like I'd betrayed him. I didn't care. Ellie started therapy the following week. She was nervous, quiet, withdrawn. But after her second session, she came home and said, "He's nice, he listens." That was more than I'd heard from her in weeks. As part of her sessions, she began writing little letters, poems, snippets of thoughts. She didn't show them to anyone, but sometimes I'd find them tucked into books, folded in her backpack, scattered near her bed. One read, "There's a silence in this house that's louder than shouting." Another, "When I draw, it's like I'm telling the truth in a language no one else speaks." I never told her I read them, but I kept them. One night, she came into my room while I was folding laundry and asked, "Did Dad ever make you feel small?" The question pierced like a needle. I hesitated. Then I said, "Yes." "Sometimes." She nodded, as if confirming something she already knew. Ellie didn't speak much about her father, but I began to notice how she flinched when his voice rose, even in laughter, how she avoided the dinner table when he was home, how her shoulders tensed when he entered a room. I asked her therapist if he thought she was being hurt. He didn't answer directly. "She's showing signs of chronic emotional suppression," he said. "It often happens in environments where expression is unsafe." That night I lay awake for hours, staring at the ceiling, counting all the ways I'd failed to make her feel safe. I thought about every time I'd smiled to keep the peace, every time I'd nodded along to Jack's rules, every time I'd told her, "It's not a big deal." It had been a big deal. It still was. I was beginning to realize that I had a choice. I could keep pretending everything was fine, or I could finally, painfully tell the truth. To myself, to Ellie, maybe even to Jack. And the truth was this. My daughter was hurting, and I was done being silent about it. It was a Tuesday. A forgettable day until it wasn't. The kind of day that begins like all the others and ends with the world cracked open. That morning, Ellie had barely touched her toast. Her eyes were red, but not from crying. It was the kind of red that came from not sleeping. I asked her if she was okay. She said, "I'm just tired." I told her she didn't have to go to school if she needed rest, but she shook her head. "I don't want to be here today." Those words stayed with me long after she'd walked out the door. That evening, just before dinner, Jack found one of Ellie's notebooks open on the kitchen counter. I don't know why she left it there, or if she meant to. But inside was a drawing, a small girl curled into herself, surrounded by towering shadows with sharp mouths and no eyes. Around the edges she'd written, "Please don't make me smile anymore." Jack picked it up and laughed. Not a cruel laugh, just dismissive. "What is this supposed to be, another one of her dramatics?" I snatched the notebook from his hands. "Don't. She's trying to get attention," he said. "This is manipulation." "No, Jack, this is a cry for help," he scoffed. "So now you're the expert?" I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, Ellie stormed into the room. Her face was flushed, her hands clenched at her sides. She must have overheard everything. "You don't get to talk about me like that," she said, voice trembling but loud. Jack froze. "Watch your tone, young lady." "No," she snapped. "I'm done watching everything. I'm done being scared all the time." My heart pounded. I'd never heard her speak like that, never. Jack stepped toward her, but I moved between them without thinking. "That's enough," I said. "Ellie, go upstairs." She hesitated, then turned and fled. Jack looked at me like I'd betrayed him. "What the hell is going on with you?" "I'm protecting our daughter," I said. "Something I should have done a long time ago. She needs discipline, not coddling. She needs to feel safe in her own home." Jack's voice rose. "You're letting her control you. She's just a kid." "No," I said. "She's a person and she's drowning." He shook his head and stormed out of the house. I stood there shaking, the notebook still in my hands. That night, Ellie didn't come down for dinner. I brought her a plate, but she didn't touch it. Later, I found her closet open and her backpack missing. Panic hit me like a wave. I ran outside, calling her name. Checked the park, the library, the lake, nothing. I called every number I could think of. No one had seen her. Then, around midnight, my phone rang. She was at Ms. Reeves's house. I drove there faster than I should have, my hands shaking on the wheel. Ms. Reeves met me at the door, her face tight with concern. "She's okay," she said gently. "She needed somewhere to go." Ellie came into the hallway, her eyes swollen and her voice hoarse. "I couldn't stay there tonight." I wrapped her in my arms. "You don't have to." She slept in my bed that night, curled up beside me like she used to when she was little. Neither of us said much. We didn't need to. The next morning, I called a lawyer. I told Jack I was taking Ellie and leaving the house. He stared at me like I was a stranger. "You're going to blow up our family over feelings. I'm going to protect my daughter." "And myself," he threatened court. Said he'd fight for custody. Said I was unstable. I let him talk. But I didn't back down. That afternoon, Ellie helped me pack. She didn't ask where we were going. She didn't ask if we'd be okay. She just said, "Thank you." And that was enough. I didn't know what the future would look like. I didn't know how we'd manage. But I knew this. Silence was no longer an option. We walked out of that house with nothing but what we could carry. But for the first time in a long while, I felt lighter, because we were walking towards something true. We moved into a 2-bedroom apartment above a small bakery on Main Street. It smelled like cinnamon every morning, and for the first time in years, our home felt warm, even if it was tiny and nothing matched. The walls were bare, the furniture second-hand, but there was no shouting, no tension, no walking on eggshells. Ellie chose the room at the back, the one with the crooked window and a view of the alley. She didn't say much that first week. She mostly sat by the window with her sketchbook, or curled up in bed with headphones on. But she was there. She was present. And that meant everything. I was terrified, but I was also relieved. Every time I heard the key turn in the lock and knew it was just us, I exhaled. It felt like waking up after holding your breath for years. We built new routines. I'd wake up early and make coffee while she got ready for school. Sometimes we'd eat together. Sometimes we didn't talk at all. But the quiet felt different now. Not heavy, just peaceful, chosen. Her therapy sessions continued weekly. She'd come home quieter than usual on those days, but calmer. She didn't share much, but occasionally she'd mention things. He asked me about my drawings today, or I told him I used to be afraid all the time. One evening, as I was folding laundry on the couch, she sat beside me and said, "Do you think people can really change?" I didn't answer right away. "I think people can learn," I said finally, "but not everyone wants to." She nodded. "I don't think Dad ever wanted to." I reached over and touched her hand. She didn't pull away. Her brothers didn't call, they didn't text. Whether it was loyalty to Jack or confusion over what had happened, I didn't know, but their silence was loud. I tried to reach out once, but the reply was short. "Hope you're okay." That was all. Ellie didn't ask about them. Instead, she began to draw again. Not just shadows and cages anymore. I found a new sketch on the fridge one afternoon, taped up with a magnet from the bakery downstairs. It showed a girl standing in the sunlight, her eyes closed, her hair blowing in the wind. At her feet were the broken pieces of something dark, like shattered glass. I didn't ask what it meant. I didn't need to. School sent a note home a few weeks later, not about concern this time, but praise. Ellie had started participating more in class. Her art teacher called her deeply expressive. A peer mentor program had matched her with a younger student struggling to adjust. Apparently, Ellie had volunteered. I cried when I read the note, just a little. We started cooking together, simple meals, spaghetti, pancakes, grilled cheese. She liked to flip the pancakes, laughing when they landed crooked. Sometimes she'd hum while she cooked. It was so quiet I almost didn't notice at first, but it was there. Music. Life. One Friday night, she asked if we could get takeout and watch a movie. She chose an old animated film we used to watch when she was little. Halfway through, she rested her head on my shoulder. "I used to pretend we were the characters in this movie," she said softly. "Which ones? The ones that ran away, the ones that made a new place for themselves." I smiled. Sounds familiar. She didn't smile back right away. Then she whispered, "I used to think no one would ever hear me." "I hear you now," I said. "I'm listening." She nodded, eyes still on the screen. One afternoon we walked through the park by the lake, the same lake where I'd found her that day after the photo. She stopped near the bench and sat down. I remember thinking, if I disappeared right now, would anyone notice? My breath caught. I sat beside her. "I would have noticed," I said. "I would have lost everything." She looked at me then, really looked at me. "I believe you now." That night she gave me a piece of paper, not a letter, a collage. It was made of torn pieces of drawings, magazine clippings, and words cut from headlines. In the center was a figure, herself I knew, with a small speech bubble above it. "This is me speaking." I framed it and put it on the wall. She started keeping her door open again. She played music in the shower. She painted her toenails. She began to exist out loud. And with every day that passed, the silence that once defined her began to fall away. We didn't wake up one day and feel whole. Healing wasn't sudden or clean. It came in fragments, quiet, uneven moments that stitched themselves together over time. And for each piece Ellie began to reclaim, I had to face one of my own that I'd buried long ago. We kept things simple. Our apartment remained modest, but Ellie started adding her touch. She painted the wall behind her desk a soft lavender, hung string lights around her window, and taped drawings to the closet door. They weren't hidden anymore. One morning I walked past her room and saw her dancing, just for a moment, barefoot, arms lifted, spinning slowly to music only she could hear. She caught me watching and blushed, but she didn't stop. I smiled and kept walking. I started keeping a journal, not for anyone else, just for me. It was a place to pour the guilt, the confusion, the regret, to write out the moments I wished I could rewrite. I wrote about the nights I didn't ask more questions, the days I smiled too tightly, the years I let someone else's voice drown out my own. Sometimes Ellie would ask what I was writing. I'd just say, "Truths I didn't say when I should have." She'd nod, like she understood that exactly. One afternoon, while cleaning the closet, I found that old photo, the one from the studio. I almost threw it out, but instead I brought it to Ellie. "Do you remember this?" She looked at it for a long time, then said, "Yeah. I remember not wanting to be in it. I sat beside her on the couch. I didn't protect you that day." "It wasn't just that day," she said. Her tone wasn't cruel. It was steady, honest. "I know," I said. "I'm sorry for all the times I didn't listen." She didn't speak right away, then she reached for my hand. "You're listening now." That photo didn't go back in the box. Ellie placed it in a drawer instead, not out in the open, but not hidden either. She said it helped to remember what pretending looked like. We made new memories, real ones. She took a photography class and began documenting our little world, the chipped mugs, the bakery cat that slept on our steps, our mismatched socks. One day she asked to take my portrait. "Why?" I asked, laughing. "I want to remember you how you really are." It was the first photo of me I didn't cringe at. I looked tired but real, loved. She started calling me from school now and then, just short check-ins. Once she said, "I had a good day." I nearly cried in the grocery store. At night we'd lie on the couch and read. Sometimes she'd share her drawings. One showed two hands reaching toward each other, fingertips almost touching. Underneath she'd written, "Becoming." I taped that one on the fridge. There was a quiet Saturday morning when she woke me up early. "I want to show you something," she said. She led me to the art supply store and picked out a canvas, her first. At home, she set it up by the window and began to paint. Over the next week, I watched it come to life, layer by layer, stroke by stroke. At first it was chaos, bright colors, clashing shapes, but then it began to take form. When she finished, she turned to me and said, "It's not supposed to make sense. It's just supposed to feel honest." And it did. I asked her if I could hang it in the living room. She nodded. It's ours now. Sometimes I still heard her crying at night. Sometimes I still flinched when the doorbell rang, expecting something from the past to crash through. We were healing, but not healed. And that was okay. Ellie told me one evening, while we were washing dishes, "I used to think healing meant forgetting, but I don't want to forget. I want to understand." That was the difference, I realized. We weren't erasing the past, we were rewriting the story we told about it, together. One day, she brought home a photo she'd taken, just of our hands side by side, resting on the kitchen table. She said, "This is my favorite." Why? Because it looks like peace. That's what we were building. Not perfection, not normalcy, just peace. And piece by piece, we were getting there. The day Ellie spoke in front of her school, I felt my heart beating in my throat. It wasn't something she'd planned ahead of time. It came out of nowhere, like a quiet storm building until it couldn't be contained. She had been invited to speak at an event about mental health and resilience, a chance to share her story in a safe space. I wasn't sure if she'd actually do it, but when she told me she wanted to, I didn't stop her. The auditorium was packed with students, teachers, and parents. I sat near the back, clutching my purse so tightly my knuckles turned white. Ellie stepped up to the microphone and I felt a wave of pride mixed with fear. I wondered how many stories like ours were out there, hidden behind smiles that didn't reach the eyes. She began slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. For a long time, I stayed silent. Her eyes scanned the room, locking briefly with mine. I smiled for the photos, for the family dinners, for the people who wanted to believe everything was okay. But inside I was breaking. She told the story of our family, of the house that looked perfect but was filled with unspoken pain. She spoke about the pressure to be normal, to hide fear, sadness, and anger. Her words painted a picture of loneliness and courage that left the audience still and breathless. "I was afraid to tell my truth," she said, "because I didn't want to hurt anyone." But silence was hurting me more. As she spoke, I thought back to that photo we'd found in the attic, the forced smiles, the hidden tears. All the times I'd missed the signs, the times I'd chosen silence over truth. Ellie spoke about therapy and how it helped her find a voice. How difficult it was to ask for help, but how important it was to keep trying. She didn't mention every detail, but the weight of what she shared was clear. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. It was one of those moments where time feels suspended and you realize something has changed, not just for her, but for everyone listening. Afterwards, students approached her with hugs and words of thanks. Some shared their own stories. Others just said, "Me too." I watched Ellie standing tall and glowing in a way I hadn't seen before. The girl who once hid behind locked doors and silence was now shining. That night, back at home, Ellie sat beside me on the couch. "I was scared," she admitted, "but I'm glad I did it." "I'm so proud of you," I whispered. She leaned her head against my shoulder. "You heard me." When no one else did. I felt tears prick my eyes. I always will. That conversation was a turning point for us, a moment where our story became more than just pain. It became hope. It became connection. In the days that followed, Ellie's confidence grew. She started volunteering at the school's mental health club, helping others find their voices. She talked more openly about her feelings. We cooked together, laughed more, and rebuilt the bridges that had once seemed broken beyond repair. Her brothers reached out, tentative at first, unsure how to navigate the new reality. Ellie didn't reject them. She welcomed the attempts, but she also set boundaries. "I'm healing," she told them, "and I need you to respect that." Jack, for his part, stayed distant. I didn't know if he was ashamed or just unwilling to face the truth. Either way, he was no longer a daily presence in our lives. Ellie and I grew closer. We shared secrets, dreams, and fears like never before. She told me she wanted to study psychology someday, help others who felt invisible. I told her she already was helping by sharing her story. We framed a new photo in the living room. Ellie and me laughing without effort, our smiles real. The old photo still sat in the drawer, a reminder of where we'd been and how far we'd come. If there's one thing I've learned through all this, it's that truth has power, that silence can kill but speaking can save, and that sometimes the smallest voice, when finally heard, can change everything. Life didn't become a fairy tale just because we finally told the truth. The journey continued, sometimes gentle, sometimes hard, but the weight of silence was gone, replaced by something lighter, fuller, and far more real. We learned every single day what it meant to choose each other all over again. Ellie and I made our home our own, piece by piece. She painted her bedroom door bright yellow, a color that made her smile every morning. Our kitchen walls became a gallery of her art and little Polaroids, photos of everyday moments, baking cookies, reading in the sun, feeding the alley cat behind the bakery. She started writing letters to herself, taping them on the bathroom mirror, affirmations, reminders, hopes for the day ahead. Sometimes she'd share them with me. "I am here, I am enough, I am allowed to feel." The first time I read those words, I realized how much she'd grown and how far we both had come from that house of silences. Her therapy continued, but it became a space for dreams as much as for healing. She started researching colleges, focused on psychology and art therapy. Her story was no longer just about pain. It was about what she could offer to others, about how she could transform scars into strength. I joined a support group for families recovering from trauma. I met other parents with stories like mine, parents who had missed the signs, who had lost themselves in the pursuit of appearances, who were now trying to rebuild trust with their children. Sharing my story helped me forgive myself, just a little more each day. On weekends, Ellie and I volunteered at a community center. She led art workshops for younger kids, showing them how to use drawing as a way to speak. She told them, "Your story matters, even if you whisper it." Watching her light up when a child smiled at her, I felt something settle inside me, a deep, healing pride. One afternoon, Ellie came home and placed a new photo frame on the living room shelf. Inside was a picture of us at the park, laughing so hard our eyes were closed. It was unposed, imperfect, and completely true. "We look happy," she said. "We are," I replied. The old photo from the studio is still with us, but we don't look at it often. It's not forgotten. It's a reminder of what pretending cost us and how powerful it is to step into the light. Our new photo sits front and center, a testament to what's possible when you choose honesty and love over silence and fear. Every day, I try to listen better, to Ellie, to myself, to the quiet that now means comfort, not danger. I check in, I ask questions. I accept that healing isn't a finish line, but a way of moving forward one moment at a time. Ellie once asked me, "Do you ever wish things had been different? That we hadn't gone through all of it?" I thought about it for a long time. "I wish I had listened sooner," I told her, "but I wouldn't trade the truth for anything." "Not now." She nodded, and for the first time I believed she truly understood. As our story began to reach others, I received messages from people who saw themselves in it. Parents, daughters, sons, friends, each with their own photos, their own silences. They thanked me and Ellie for sharing the hard parts, for showing that it's never too late to change, to choose something new. If you're still listening, I want you to know, your voice matters, your feelings matter. It's okay to let go of the need to pretend. Someone will hear you, and sometimes that person is yourself. Before you go, if this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of truth and healing, please consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us share more stories like this, stories that can reach someone at just the right moment. And if you want to continue on this journey with us, there's a suggested video waiting for you right now. Click on it to hear another story of hope, resilience, and the courage it takes to finally speak. We're still here. We're still learning. And every day we choose honesty, love, and the possibility of something better. Thank you for listening.